It's a show with two retired detectives that were in the thick of New York crime, fast and hectic. They got some stories and some jokes, even an interview with the most popular folks. Off the cuff, one episode just ain't enough. Get a little laughter and an interview too. It's maybe the best thing you can do.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, Bill Cannon, and I'm here with my co-host tonight, straight out of Brooklyn, Phil Grimaldi. How you doing tonight, Phil?
But Billy, I'm getting in the holiday spirit here with my Wonder Wheel in the background and my little Christmas lights. I guess when we did the Christmas show the other night, I figured, what the hell, I'm going to keep it going.
Hey, why not? You know, we had a little... Before we came on the air, we had a couple of technical disasters, but luckily we figured them out in a nick of time. Tonight we have a really amazing guest coming on, and his name is John Baeza, and he just put out a book called The Complete Guide to Sex Crime Investigation. I was thinking of John Cebino, and I was thinking of the Rape Investigation Handbook, which is totally different. But this is the Complete Sex Crime Investigation Handbook. John Baeza, retired NYPD detective. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, both of you. I appreciate it very much. And the book was very much a work of love. Over 20 years, I had to revise it, and I finally got inspiration from a deputy chief in the fire department, Vincent Dunn. He's retired. He's a well-known chief. He knew my father in Engine 58. And he told me, we have to leave something of ourselves behind. And the only thing I really knew that I could leave behind was something about investigating, how to properly investigate a sex crime and leave all the stuff that didn't need to be in there. I wanted that out, and I wanted a book I could give to a patrolman, somebody who's never done a sex crime, somebody who has done a sex crime, prosecutor, defense attorney, or even a victim, so that they would know how their crime was supposed to be investigated. So that's what got me to publish this book, and I'm so glad that it's out there. We're all biased, but I think it's a good piece of work.
Well, I think a sex crime is a crime that is very unique to the investigator. And I remember when I was in Manhattan North Homicide Squad, Special Victims was on the same floor as us in 3280 Broadway. And I think you had been retired, and I worked a lot of cases with your ex-partner, John Cebino. And to me, he was one of the best detectives that I ever worked with, even homicide, sex crimes, whatever. He was an outstanding detective, so very thorough and so very knowledgeable about at one time, he was the most experienced sex crime investigator in the country. And he was an incredible investigator. So I imagine you worked with him and you were trained by him. You probably have to be at the same level.
Yeah, I was trained right from the beginning. When I first got there out of Narcotics, I didn't know anything about investigation. So I picked the guy who was getting the most confessions, real confessions, doing real cases. And I partnered up with John Cebino. I copied everything he did because it worked. And then I had my own little style eventually that I developed. But John was my partner, my mentor. And to me, there was no better sex crime detective that I've ever seen. I tried to be half the detective that he was, and I could never get to that level, I don't think.
There's the cover of your book, The Complete Guide to Sex Crime Investigations. For detectives, say from other jurisdictions, other departments, how is this different than the way that they would investigate a sex crime? What are your recommendations?
Well, this book is a little bit different. It takes out a lot of like history of rape and everything. All that stuff is out. You can read that elsewhere. But if you want, this takes you from the initial 911 call or call to the precinct or even to special victims to the hospital, to even before you leave running a records check. Nowadays it's a little different, but we used to run that right away. Going to the hospital, getting the quick story from the victim, and then going over to work with crime scene, having an idea of what you're in command of that crime scene. And I don't necessarily mean that you're in charge, whatever, but you are, because you go to court and you're the one testifying, right? So you got to take control of that. So that's what I did in this investigator's guide. Is I just put the basic stuff in there, and there's some stuff in there that people will laugh at. One of them is, I have in there, you got to bring a pen and some paper with you, right? Now everybody kind of laugh at that, but I cannot tell you how many times I've been to a scene where somebody else, another detective, asks the victim, "Can I borrow a pen and a piece of paper?" We got to be a little more professional than that. So I put some of that down in there. And this book is also talks about false reports, which John Cebino and I, we estimated we had at least 20% of our cases were false reports. I've been involved in over 300 arrests of women and men for false reports. So that's part of the book. Part of the book is how not to get a false confession. Sometimes it's hard. Some cops don't necessarily always do this on purpose, but sometimes it's hard. They get frustrated after a while and they'll give out information, So I talk about this. I put some links in the book. It's in the Kindle book as well. And I'm going to make this into a 5-day course. But I put some links in that were for that cops would like from The Wire. There was a scene where they go to the crime scene. All they use is the F word to communicate. You guys might know that scene.
Yeah, it was a great scene,
actually.
The
suicide was actually, a homicide. How you have to really investigate a crime, and how you have to invest yourself in the victim and treat your victim as if it's your sister, your mother, your brother, your father, whatever. I know we all who are professionals do that, but I want to impress upon the younger detectives and patrolmen and so forth that are learning this, that this is what they need to do. So that was covered in the book. I went all the way into wrongful convictions. And I say, listen, the case usually stops at prosecution, people say, but I say, no, it doesn't stop. If you get a wrongful conviction, you get pieces of evidence that come to you, you have to go and now research and make sure that, you don't have an innocent man in there. Now, it doesn't happen that often, but we have to prevent it. So I go into some things like that as well.
John, let me
in the book, and I think it's a very good book for patrolmen. Like I said, if you don't have a sex crime and you're like riding, I worked here for 30 years down here in Florida as a deputy. I can tell you, not that these guys were not doing their job or anything, but everybody I worked with could have used this book.
John, could I just make one quick point to you? John, I got to make one quick point to you.
To take the call,
So
I think the book would be very instructional to new detectives and also, like I said, patrol officers, people that never even did a sex crime investigation before.
John, can you hear us? Are you hearing us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, real quick. I just want to make one quick point. Shame on any detective. Shame on any detective. I'll say it a second time, that shows up to the scene of, God forbid, a rape or something like that and asks a victim for a pen or a piece of paper. That guy shouldn't have a shield and shouldn't be an investigator.
Well, I'm with you on that. And in the book, I also talk about something that's happened to me a couple of times. Somebody interviewing the victim on the bed where the attack occurred.
Wow.
I've had she was an inspector at the time. I won't name her. She was in the 19th precinct. And one day I went up to the scene to interview the victim, and she's sitting there asking the victim questions that, the victim knew that I should be asking her, and who was this woman? And it turned out I told the inspector, I said, Inspector, you know, I've got to put you on the thing for the court list now because you're going to have to testify. And boom, she was gone out of there.
For sure.
So Joanne, or whatever her name was, she
I
and
know,
didn't
I know
see eye to
exactly.
eye.
I know who it is, but
I know
let's leave,
exactly who
let's
you're
You
leave
know
talking
it
it
is.
nameless.
She and I
John,
didn't see eye to
John,
eye.
I
I'm
wanna
not saying
ask-
anything else bad about him.
John,
Just
I
saying,
want to ask you
in that
something.
case,
He's not hearing me at all.
she did the wrong thing. But, you know, bosses have, I'm talking about, you know, higher up bosses. They want to stick their nose in where it doesn't belong. You guys probably have been through that as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, that does happen. John, can you hear Bill? He seems to think that you
Yeah,
can't hear him.
I've been trying to ask you a question, and you're not hearing me. Are you hearing me at all?
He's a little low. I can't hear him as
Yeah,
good. Maybe
your
you could
mic-
transfer the question.
his mic is a little muffled. Bill, why don't you ask me and I'll ask John?
Well, I was just going to ask him in sex crimes, but a lot of people don't realize that there are so many false reports, and he said up to 20%. Advocates of sex crime investigation will refute that and say that's not true. But the real investigators, I think they know that that is in fact the truth.
Bill, that's correct.
Okay.
False reports have always been a problem. And in order to talk to people about it, it's a very hot topic. We've swung from the 70s where, you know, nobody was supposed to believe the victims, I guess, into an era where everybody just believed victims, and any break in the logic, they just explain away. And I've seen other detectives do it. But of course, I learned from John, and then I worked on myself on these things. And the false reports, Linda Fairstein at one point said 50% of the 5,000 cases that came through the DA's office were false reports. Now, I'm not going to go that high, but I will tell you that it was at least 20, sometimes 30% of cases. And you got to remember, other cases that I would look at on the board that would be from other detectives, you look at it and you're like, and then they just B6 the case or whatever. And me, I wouldn't B6. I'd get an A1, you know.
Well, John, let me ask you something about false reports. How do you disprove a report that you in fact think is a false report? How do you go about proving that it's a false report?
The first thing you do is when you have to know your crime scene. Obviously, you know that, both of you guys. You have to know the crime scene, your evidence, and so forth. But once you know that, you know, you've been to the crime scene. And can I give you an example, or you?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. I mean, I know the answer. I want
for
our listeners.
Billy, your mic is good now.
Yeah, I fixed it. I was able to fix it.
One of the cases I had, a woman said she was, somebody broke into the apartment. She was about 19, broke into the apartment, cut her with a razor, raped her, went through the house, you know, looking for stuff, and then left through the rear window on the fire escape. So the first thing we find is a pregnancy test in a garbage pail in the bathroom, right? Second thing we do is I go up after the crime scene is done, and you know they're good. Crime scene's good too. They see these things too. But what I did was I went up the fire escape, and the fire escape had just been painted. You know how it gets tacky, and there's marks on it when I put my feet, but there were no marks on it before me. Then I went to the window, and the window had cobwebs on it. Then I looked at the bed below the window where you would jump to, and that bed was flat. So what happened is I allowed the victim to go to the hospital, and I actually talked to an emergency room doctor. You know what he told me? He said, I said, Doc, what do you think about those, that wound on her face? He said, that could come up from a straight edge razor. Okay. Now, it didn't look like that to me. What it looked like to me was somebody took their fingernail and scraped it across her eye. Now, where this emergency room doctor came off, again, you have to believe all victims, and that's not the way it works. But anyway, I brought her back to the station, and they thought it was a big, it was part of a burglary rape case series that was going on in 9th Precinct. So Sergeant Wazalewski, I don't know if any of you guys know him, Waz?
Yeah, I know who he is, yeah.
Yeah, he was my boss at the time, so he had me go over to the court. I took care of the case, brought her back up to the office, and I explained things to her. And then I said, listen, at this point, from what I know and all the evidence, I now have to give you your Miranda warnings because now you're under suspicion for filing a false report. So I give the Miranda warnings. And then what I typically do in most of these cases is walk out, give about a couple minutes, walk back in. And typically, not always, but typically, the false reporter would be crying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, this is what happened. Or, sometimes you had women who were jumping off the wagon. They were cocaine addicted women, and their husbands, they were out on a bender. They come back and they make the story up, and you're locked. She said, I'm locked up in a room for 3 days. I said, all right, you're locked up. Where'd you go to the bathroom? All of a sudden you get a look like they didn't think about that, right? So you get a look like, what the heck's going on? So these were the false reports we're talking about. The biggest false report, and I'll give John Cebino credit here while we talk, because it's a good story. A couple from Canada came down to Central Park, and they said their baby was kidnapped from the park in the middle of the day. Now, even Homicide Squad knew that this is BS, right? But they couldn't get her to talk, the mother or the father. So John went in and he said, can I talk to the mother for a second? He went in, and within 10, 15 minutes, he came out with a map of where the baby was up in Canada in a ditch, dead. And they asked him, well, how did you do this? And he said, I just asked her. I said, how long were you staying down here? 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, is that all your luggage right there? Everything? Yeah. He said, okay, take out the baby's clothes for me. Her face went to white. She couldn't tell him. So therefore, boom. And she comes out with a map, and sure enough, our CMP found the body up there.
That's a brilliant.
That's one of my learning experiences. But I've had hundreds of arrests of women for false reports, and I think during a couple month period, me and John must have had like 23 arrests. We were just But
Hey, John.
remember,
Hey, John.
I don't mean to talk too much, but if you get that many arrests, that many false reports, you still, if it's 20%, you still got another 80% that are real that you need to spend time with. And back then, we only had 22 detectives to work 5,000 cases. So your caseload was big.
Hey, John, I worked in the squad a lot of years.
You came right after me. I think I retired right before you got there.
Yeah.
And
hey, John,
he's not hearing us, I don't think.
Can you hear me, John?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I worked in the squad a lot of years, and obviously when somebody would be reporting either a rape or some type of a sexual assault, they would notify the squad first. We would usually, I worked in the 6-0 squad a lot of years, so we would respond, or we would have the person in the squad room. We would try to talk to them and get some brief details. Now, obviously, if it was a stranger rape or a stranger sex attack, and we felt that it was credible, we would immediately notify we used to call it the sex crime squad back then it became special victims. We would notify them, and but we wouldn't be afraid to ask the tough questions if there was something that wasn't adding up. Like you gave a great point when you said the first thing that your partner Cebino said to the woman was, show me the baby's clothing. The color probably went out of her face. That was a great point. Now, again, when we're presented with a case and we're supposed to be getting, we're supposed to be defending victims and trying to get justice for victims. But if you know something is not right, it doesn't smell right, I was never afraid to ask the tough questions. And I've used this analogy before, and it being Christmas time. If I don't get a Christmas card this year from that person, that's okay. I don't mind upsetting the apple cart a little bit, especially when someone's peeing in my eye and telling me it's raining. You know what I mean? So, but I think that, the way that the New York City Police Department is set up, there's good detectives in the squad and even good people on patrol. Patrol would notify us of something. They'd say, listen, we got this woman. She's claiming this, this, or that, but we don't think it's so. Listen, that didn't happen a lot of times. They're saying it's 20%. I don't think the number was that high where I work. However, I'm not going to deny that there are people that make up these stories. And again, they go out on a bender, just like you said, and it happens. And being a good detectives, especially a good sex crimes, or a special victims detective, you have to be able to decipher those things, and a lot of times it's just a little thing here or there, and it all starts to add up, and then you have to press down, and you have to sometimes get tough with a victim or a witness or whoever it is, and you got to get to the truth. I've listened to the radio and heard a story on the radio about some outlandish thing. It wasn't in New York. It was in Jersey. A kid was kidnapped, held the whole day, blah, blah, blah. I knew it was BS right away. And I said it. I was in the car with my wife. I said it. And then I called my partner. And sure enough, I said, Artie, there's going to be another one. And sure enough, the next day they would say, well, the person that reported it was now arrested for filing a false police report. We kind of build instincts is the point. And we know when things just aren't adding up, So that's just one of the points I wanted to make. But listen, I think that you do great work. And that handbook that you put out, that's probably going to be very, very good tool for, let's say a patrolman that works in a small town. And, a lot of times they'll kick the investigation to the state police. But maybe on the early stages of the investigation, that book would probably be a great tool for somebody like that.
Yeah, Phil, I'm hearing a lot of cracking. I don't know where that's coming from.
Yeah, I don't know either. I thought it was you trying to get your mic going.
No, I don't think so. I think it might be from his phone. Maybe because no, I'm hearing a lot of scratching.
Phil, I'm sorry you were talking there. I'm sorry I couldn't hear that, but I just want to make one mention on that. Yeah, you know what it is too? John and I both have received flowers from these women we've arrested. And they got arrested in Manhattan, but it had to be a full confession. And the DA, like Linda Fairstein, the Lisa Friel, they'd have to go along with it. So, you really have to put your evidence in order for that. But the thing was never to be argumentative or yelling at a victim. And I did the same thing with suspects. And it went a great way for me to be able to get confessions and so forth from not only suspects, but also, false reporters, is to not yell at them, not scream at them, because they're just gonna defend up. It's gonna buck up, and that's gonna be it. I've had guys. I worked in Sing-Sing as a correctional officer. I had a guy that he was sexually assaulted and raped and robbed a woman, and I had got him to confess by talking about Sing-Sing. I told the truth. It wasn't false.
Bill, are you hearing his?
Yeah, John, you're cracking up. I'm going to remove you, and I'm going to have you come back in because your sound is horrible. All right. Can you hear me? Good, Phil.
Yes, I can hear you.
That's all his sound. His sound is horrible right now, and that's
I think the crackling was coming from him. Yeah. You're still a little bit low. You were better for a few minutes. You're still a little bit low, but I could hear you. All right,
let me hang on one second. I just let me see if I can get this right.
It sounds like you're muffled. Like there's something.
How am I right now?
That's good. That's good.
I just had to change it. It's all coming. It's a phone sometimes. We apologize to you guys that are listening.
Yes.
Sometimes he didn't know that he had to have Google Chrome to log on to StreamYard, and then he went on with his phone, and at the last minute, and the sound is horrible. I'm going to bring him back and see if his sound is better. John, can you hear me now, John? Yeah, your sound is cracking up.
I think he's frozen too.
Yeah, I think I'm going to bring him out. What we intended to talk about, John Baeza worked in 1994, I believe it was to 1998, the Upper East Side of Manhattan had what was known as a rape pattern called the East Side Rapist or the Silver Gun Rapist. And he was following women into buildings on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, which is the sort of the Gold Coast of Manhattan. And it went on for 4 years. From 1994 to 1998, and this individual was never apprehended. And there's many theories about it. They have DNA. They were going to try to do the ancestry DNA to try to get him apprehended. Let me try to see if I can bring John back here.
Go ahead. There's a couple of questions I had from him too.
It's still, John, your sound is still it's cracking up. That's can you maybe lower your phone a little bit? Maybe that'll do it.
I think if he lowers his volume, that may help sometimes.
Yeah, John, can you lower your volume? Can you hear us, John?
I'm sorry about that.
Now he's frozen, Bill. You know what? I think it's his Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. So yeah, Philly, he was going to talk about the Upper East Side rape pattern, and I think that you read a bit about it.
Yes.
He sent us a synopsis of it by email. You want to talk a bit about it?
Yeah, I'll talk a bit about it. I'm going to try and pull it up. I know that. Well, basically, he had a rundown of. He was obviously assigned to the pattern, like you said. It was 16 cases. He probably got assigned to it after the first 3 or 4 cases, I would imagine. And what he did was he chronicled steps that they were going to take to try and cover all the bases anytime there was a rape case reported. Now, it was the Upper East Side. Basically, what he told me in the intro before we went on the air was that the perpetrator was following these females into a 2-door building that didn't have a doorman. Now, what a 2-door building is, it's a small vestibule. You go into the first door. There's usually a bank of bells that you would ring the bell, and then you get buzzed in. And for whatever reason, this perpetrator was able to sneak up on women where they would walk into the building and they wouldn't see him until they were in between those 2 doors, and boom, he'd be right on them. He'd produce the gun. He would either take them to their apartment and commit the sex act, or he would sometimes do it actually in a dark spot somewhere in the building, in the hallway, or whatever. A couple of times he did beat the victims, I guess victims that probably put up a struggle, turned around and tried to fight him off, and he did beat them, but none of them were killed, I believe. I don't think were any of them. Did any of them actually?
None of them were killed. But one of the things about this pattern, it lasted 4 years, and
then
not only did they have specialized units on it, but they had all the anti-crimes from across the city working in the 19th precinct on overtime with a sketch of this individual trying to maybe stop him before he committed a crime. And reviewing all the cases for the MO, which is the modus operandi, which is very, very important, not just when tracking a perpetrator, but when trying to figure out how and where and what he's going to do when he strikes, what his MO is. And his MO was specifically following women into buildings that had double doors. Obviously, he wouldn't go into doorman buildings because he would be seen by the doorman. So he chose these buildings where maybe, a real safety problem in New York City is buildings that have the mail between the mailboxes, between the door outside that's unlocked and the door inside that is locked. So that when people go to get their mail, that's a lot of times when perpetrators, robbers, rapists, grand larcenists, that's where they'll strike, between those 2 doors. And this was specifically his MO. And then when you talk about, I don't know, Philly, if you could explain signature, what the signature of a rapist is. Are you familiar with that term?
Sure. I mean, signature is going to be, let's say, God forbid, there's a rape and the perpetrator will use a condom, or he'll put a scarf over his face, or he'll use some type of a substance to overcome the victim. These would be considered signatures of that particular rapist.
Another thing could be what the rapist says.
Absolutely.
He may say a very specific thing every time. And that's one of the ways that investigators know that it's the same guy, besides when they do get DNA, of course, connecting the DNA. There's also something, and it's called geographical profiling. Now, geographical profiling is profiling according to where the perpetrator is going to strike. And geographical profiling is profiling according to where the perpetrator is going to strike. John, you have your phone on?
Sounds like he has the computer on as well as the phone.
Yeah, and it's back. It's behind. Anyway, so well, we were talking about the
signatures.
The signature, yes.
Geographical
profiling, because most perpetrators strike in an area, A, that they're familiar with, B, that is very close to where they live.
Right.
And it could also be that the perpetrator works in that area. So he's very accustomed to this area and he's comfortable with it. So that takes into account something called geographical profiling. With this case, they made 3 appearances on the TV show America's Most Wanted. And even with all that publicity, he still was never apprehended, and he remains at large to this day.
You know, Bill, you brought up that point about the geographical area. I mean, I think to me, what that spells out, it's the comfort zone of the perpetrator. He's gonna prey on an area that he's gonna he wants to feel comfortable with it. He wants to know the area. He wants to feel comfortable with the area. Again, so he can prey, do what he has to do, and escape without being apprehended. So a lot of times, like you said, it could be a rapist that takes in an area, where he works or close to where he lives. It's just amazing how much went into this case. I mean, John listed a bunch of things. Like you said, the 3 appearances on America's Most Wanted. I mean, America's Most Wanted in those days, that was a #1 rated television show with tremendous viewership. There's been cases that I've been involved with that were very successful once they were profiled on America's Most Wanted. So again, going back to the signature, I worked on a case where they formed a task force because it was really, really getting out of control. It was like 30 or 40 cases. It wasn't a rape. It was a sex abuse where a guy would hide in the bushes and he would jump out of the bushes. He would throw a pillowcase over the the victim's head, and he would just fondle them. He would grab their breasts and then take off. And it later was determined to be a police officer from the actual precinct where we were turning out of from the task force. It was in the 6A precinct. And this officer actually worked in that precinct, and it was eventually uncovered, and he was arrested and charged and thrown off the police force. But that would be another signature. That's how
John,
we knew it.
John Baeza put in since he can't, his sound is bad, he put in the chat. The East Side rapist also took souvenirs from victims, licenses, and IDs. That's known as a trophy.
Yes.
In rape patterns and even murder patterns and serial killers, serial rapists, they take trophies because it helps them to relive the experience of the rape, of the violence of it. And that's why they take what's called trophies. And in fact, the East Side rapist was doing this. This case took on, they traveled to California to track a suspect. No stone was left unturned in this case. And even after all of this time, and the pattern ended in 1998, sad to say that no one was ever apprehended. They've taken hundreds, thousands of samples, of voluntary samples of DNA to elimination DNA to see if they could make a hit with the East Side rapist. However, as I said, to this day, there have been no one has been identified. He had spoken to me off the air saying that they were looking into maybe trying to use ancestry DNA, where they have something called familial DNA. And Philly, I don't know if you know enough about that to explain that, but that's how they've gotten a lot of hits on serial. The killer in California, who was recently apprehended a year or two ago, that did murders and rapes like 35 years ago. He was just identified a year or two ago from familial DNA.
Yes,
through an ancestry site.
Yeah. Familial DNA, expertise and science has gotten so good that what you're talking about, the familial DNA, if there's a DNA sample and there is DNA in a database, it could actually say that this person that you have their sample is actually related to someone within the database. So what that would do is that would give you a person to go talk to. And it could even be so exact as to say it's related as a sibling or a cousin or a parent, things of that nature. So now you would go to that person and you would try to, I guess, tiptoe around to investigate what connection do you have to, you'd know who the victim was. So you'd say to the location, what connection do you have to this location? Da, 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 da. And you'd start the conversation like that. And then you would then if it comes up as a sibling, do you have any brothers or sisters? And then you would go from there and say, what's their whereabouts? What do they do? And go into that area. And a lot of times cases, like you said, Bill, have been solved based on familiar DNA.
K.H. Walker, genetic genealogy caught the Golden State Killer. That's who I was referring to. Thank you very much for bringing that up. And I think that case was like 30 or 35 years old. And thank God he's going to be held accountable. I don't know how many murders he did, but science is an unbelievable thing. John Baeza and his partner spent 5 days at the, they traveled to Quantico to meet with 10 FBI profilers, and a waste of time. I mean, that, everyone thinks that this, you say those 3 letters FBI and they think that the Lord is going to come down from the sky. I found that profiling is,
it's a little too general, Billy. I think
it's way too, when I was watching the Beltway Sniper, and the FBI came up with a profile of a male white 35 to 45. Everything was wrong. The shooter was a male black. He was 17. That's what it turned out to be. After that profile, I was like, they're done as far as I'm concerned.
Listen, a lot of work goes into those profiling things. And listen, Quantico, the FBI lab there, they do have some tremendous scientific experts there that really can decipher evidence and help locate different things when it comes to examination of evidence. I'm not going to say that they don't have a great lab there, but the profiling, as he said, he spoke with 10 different profilers. At the end of the day, he thought it was a waste of time. And listen, when you have a case like this and it's all these rapes and it's the Upper East Side of Manhattan, I guess, you're going the extra mile. You're doing all these different things. I'm sure the bosses probably took a big interest in this case and were saying, why don't you get a hold of the FBI, talk to the profilers? So they covered a lot of bases here. And it's been my experience that when you have a pattern and the pattern goes dead, meaning all of a sudden it stops, a lot of times it could be that the perpetrator is dead or the perpetrator is incarcerated. Now, the way DNA works today, if you're incarcerated on most felonies and some misdemeanors, they take a sample of your DNA in New York anyhow. So now your DNA is in the database. So I would think that if it was somebody that was incarcerated for a misdemeanor that they didn't take their DNA, they wouldn't have been in jail for a long period of time. And the rapes, the sexual assaults may have, started up again. So the angle that they're taking on this case, or what they feel, is that it could have been someone related to a foreign consulate, whether it be a son of or a person that worked in a consulate, and now they were moved out of the consulate to another country. And that's probably a good indication what could have happened. I think it's obvious, the other 2 that I mentioned are also good indications. But I would think if they were incarcerated, with the way DNA is taken today on, long-term incarceration, something would have popped.
The other thing was back in 1994, 1998, there was a statute of limitations to rape. So someone came up with the brilliant idea of indicting the DNA. Even though the DNA wasn't, obviously, they didn't know who it wasn't identified. They would indict the DNA profile,
right?
So that it would not go past the statute of limitations. I think since that point, the law has been changed, and they don't have to worry about that anymore. But that was a brilliant idea.
That really is. That sounds like Joe Murray territory to me. Something that he would come up with, But
well, I think it was a great idea.
Michael Vecchione, that's really ingenious.
It could be. They also they spent 5 days at 8 hours a day at the New York State DMV in Albany, going through DMV photos of the zip codes that covered the entire 19th precinct, hoping that they could identify a possible perpetrator that lived in the 19th precinct from motor vehicle photos. And that was also met with negative results.
Those are tremendous steps that they're taking, Billy. They put in the work on this case.
Well, every Friday and Saturday night, they would take a victim out with them and canvass the entire 19th precinct. Also, a very effective way, it's called a victim canvass, because who's better than the eyes of the victim to identify the perpetrator? And many times the perpetrator is walking around the street free as if he's just a normal human being going about his business.
Yes, I've done hundreds of those victim canvases. They've been successful only a handful of times. I'll admit the truth. It's not a lot of times that you're going to actually capture the the perpetrator on a victim canvas. But again, like you said, when we would have robberies that took place near the train station, we would take the victim over at the same date, the same day of the week and time. And a lot of times, yeah, a perpetrator that was robbing people coming off the train would be in the area, and we would be successful in making an arrest on a case like that. Here's Joe Murray now.
Joe Murray, the DNA collection, thank you for the $4.99 super chat. The DNA collection from convicted defendants is very sloppy and not done by medical professionals. It's done by court officers. Joe, the way that DNA is collected, it's just collected through a swab of the inside of the cheek with a Q-tip. And then it's put inside. You can even have the defendant do it himself,
right,
or herself. And then it's put inside a paper envelope. And because paper doesn't degrade evidence. If they put it in plastic, it degrades the evidence. So that's how it's collected. It's not really advanced rocketry to collect DNA, and it's not intrusive at all. It's not like we're taking blood or cutting hair. We're just swabbing the inside of their cheek cells for DNA cells. So that's how it's done. And I know an attorney would always find a reason to say, "Oh, that's not a medical personnel." I mean, how much training do you need to swab the inside of someone's cheek with a Q-tip?
I see where he's going with it. Cross
I could
contamination.
I could see all of that.
But listen, it's what you said. If you ever taken a DNA sample, it's what you said. You take the Q-tip, you go on the inside of the mouth, you rub it up and down about 4 or 5 times against the skin, and you're going to pick up the DNA, and it goes into that container, that whether it be an envelope or whatever container that they use. And I don't think that there's really a lot of possibility, if you're using common sense, that you could really mess that up. Again, I don't know if Joe's going to put up another comment about it, but there may be a case that he's working on where DNA was collected sloppily, and it could have been compromised. And I don't know. We'll have to see what Joe says about that. But I really think that the DNA science is really, really good. It's gotten so much better. I mean, when I was first working homicides, the only thing when we would get a blood sample and send it for DNA, they'd be able to tell us if it was human or animal blood, or human, or it would just say human or non-human, and it was able to tell us male or female. Now, you would have to have a person to collect from to do a match. There was no databases in them days. But now, today, I mean, look at the advances that they've done with it. I mean, they can take from 9/11, they can take tiny little pieces of bone and come up with DNA by doing all different things. They can extract DNA from it. So the science of DNA has really, really advanced, and I think it's great. It's a great tool in law enforcement's utility belt.
Well, folks, with the Phil was mentioning at 9/11, a lot of the advances, not just in New York City, but throughout the whole world, is due to the 9/11 attacks that the New York City office of the chief medical examiner and our old friend Barbara Butcher was the lead person in the DNA for identifying 9/11. And what they needed was what's called an exemplar. And if, say, I was missing during 9/11, they would go to my family and get some of my clothing, maybe a toothbrush, maybe a hair, although I didn't have any hair really that they could collect from, because I kept my hair so short, there was no hair left in the
They go right to that Irish hat you wear and pull one out.
They'd go to my hat, pull out, sweat, whatever. And that's how they would get an exemplar. And the exemplar was put into the World Trade Center database. And that's how they made a lot of identification.
Bill, they could even use, you brought up a good point. They would even be able to use your children to compare DNA.
That'd be familial DNA. And if it was a close match. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, with this was one of the things that in Special Victims does, which I find tremendously interesting, and they still do it. And this is a detective in this picture. His name is Alan Sandomir. And he was an excellent detective, him and his partner, Eddie Tacky. And they were known as the cold hit detectives. And what a cold hit is when they would get a hit on DNA and the suspect was in prison. So they would go to visit the prisons around New York State, and they would go visit the perpetrator in prison. And you think it's very easy, but how they would confront him, they would go and introduce themselves, and they wouldn't just say, "Oh, we found your DNA," above, they would lead up to that. They would say, we just want to ask you a few questions, and I'll just make up the scenario. Have you ever been inside 3333 Broadway? Guy'd be like, nah. You ever been inside apartment 5 boy in that building? I told you I've never been in that building. So you've never been in apartment 5 boy? No, I've never been in that building. Okay. Have you ever met this woman here? Then you could see on their face, no, I don't know who she is. I don't know who she is. Okay, so let's take this statement. You've never been in 3333 Broadway. You've never been in 5 boy. You don't know this woman yet. You've never met this woman before. No, he'd sign a statement, negative on all those questions, and they would break it to him. Guess what? Your DNA was found in that apartment, and your DNA was found inside this woman who you've never met. What that would do is slam the door on any possibility of this perp saying we had consensual sex. Because A, he wasn't never in that building. B, was never in apartment 5 boy.
Right.
And C, he never met this woman before. How
Right.
could you have consensual sex with someone you never met before?
Yeah, that's a
So-
smart interrogator.
Right. So they would slam the door, and all those. These guys were amazing at it. They would, and all of a sudden, the guy who was getting out in 6 months, you're going to be getting out in 6 months in the year 2042.
Yeah.
Because they were so good at their job. And it's Alan Sandomir and his partner Eddie Tacky were part of the cold hit DNA unit of Manhattan Special Victims.
That sounds like a good team there. They employed some really good detective tactics. Bill, I just wanted to make a comment about what John was talking about the false reporting. I want to make this clear. I don't want anybody that's watching or any of our subs or any people that are listening to think that we're not being empathetic towards God forbid, a rape victim. I mean, I had a case one time, not me personally, but me and guys in the squad. A woman was jogging on the boardwalk on Coney Island. She was hit upon by five youths, a wolf pack. They dragged her under the boardwalk. They beat her and they raped her. And by the time she got into the precinct, I mean, she literally had a heel print on her forehead, a black and blue heel print. Now, when you are met with something like that, she was found half clothed when she came out from under the boardwalk by the uniformed police officers. All of these different indicators, it was quite obvious that there was no nonsense in her story. Just a sub note, a few days later, within about 2 or 3 days, the 5 perpetrators were captured, and we were actually on the front page of all the newspapers walking them out of the precinct because they took it very lightly. They had the headline was "They laughed all night," and that was just one of those cases. Again, you start hearing something that doesn't make sense, you question it. In that case, when you have a victim, she's half clothed, she comes out from under the boardwalk, she's in jogging clothes, she's beat up, she's got that footprint on her forehead. There's no question about what she's going to tell you at that point, unless something, does appear to be suspicious. But you have to have empathy, obviously, and you also have to be sharp and be able to, if somebody starts giving you BS, you have to be able to push back on that.
Joe Murray, I mean, you're coming up with some great
Here we
ones
go.
from the trenches of the courts. Thank you for the 1999 super chat, very much appreciated. A court officer told my client to swab his own cheek by putting his finger in his mouth to open it wider and swab it. I objected because client's hands are on the defendant's table where every other defendant sits. The judge agreed.
Oh,
Joe, that's why you make the big bucks.
Yeah. Listen, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the Q-tip has got to come out of a packet. It's a sealed packet, and it's got to go from the packet to the person's mouth and then back into the envelope. I mean, that's just common sense to me. I mean, anybody that was doing that was obviously not instructed properly and an amateur and not doing it the right way. But that's a great point, Joe. See, I knew there was an angle behind when he came up with it from the first. That's a good lawyer, that Joe Murray.
These 2 detectives, the one on the right-hand side is John Cebino, and he was in Manhattan Special Victims. As I said, he was a at one time the most experienced sex crimes investigator in the United States. Brilliant, brilliant detective, and he was John Baez's partner. I just want to tell you a quick story about him. He called me up and said, Sarge, we're all off Sunday, and he goes, I'm going to be on America's Most Wanted on Saturday night, and I'm featuring a case of this rapist named Stephen Peppuccino, who raped a girl and almost stabbed her to death. And I don't want to tell the whole story, but he was featured on America's Most Wanted, and he was wanted, I think, for over a year. He couldn't find him. He was looking from all over. Sure enough, America's Most Wanted gets shown on a Saturday night. For some reason, no one from Special Victims is working Sunday. Who's in Sunday morning? Myself and the A-team of Manhattan North Homicide Squad. All the calls from Special Victims are coming into our office. The phone is ringing off the hook with calls. Stephen Peppuccino is in Queens. He's in a bar at this such and such a location. So I was like, beautiful, saddle up. We got our horses. We started heading towards Queens. But first I called the Queens squad that was right down the block from this bar. The detectives go in the bar. I told them, look, this guy's Stephen Peppuccino. Here's his nicest number. Pull up his picture. He's in the bar. He's wanted for an attempted murder rape. They go in the bar. He's sitting at the bar drinking, and they do an okey doke. They walk in and out. They don't see him. The bartender's like, that's him, but she can't say it out loud because she's terrified. The Queens detectives leave, and they miss the guy. I get to the bar 5 minutes later, and the bartender goes, these detectives came in, and he was sitting right there, and they didn't get. I was like, oh my God. I was like crazy. So we took a good description, what he was wearing and everything, and I said to all the detectives, I go, look, he's an alcoholic. He's going to be in another bar. Let's just canvass the bars around the area. Second bar we looked in, there he is right at the bar. And he had put it out to his family and all his thug friends that he would not be taken alive. But when he had 6.9 millimeters pointed at his fat head, he decided to choose life. So instead of...
Did he ask for one last drink before?
No, can I get one for the road? Because I'm not going to get out for about 25 to 30 years.
I like a short one, and you do make them short.
But that was another success story from America's Most Wanted. The power of television is just incredible, Now
you're gonna get Bill, Joe Murray, very upset because he's not a big fan of John Walsh. But
I know that's for sure. But
hopefully he's not going to get too excited.
But you know something, the show works. The power of television, it's just incredibly, and it's unbelievable, Getting back to the Upper East Side rapist, and Phil alluded to it before, is that they thought that the perpetrator may have been the son of some foreign diplomat, because he just disappeared from the Upper East Side. And that would make sense. Either he left the country, because CODIS, which stands for the Combined DNA Identification System, is a national system, not an international system. So he could have left this country and went back to his country, and to never come back to this country again, and walking around as a free man. And unless he's arrested in this country, his DNA will never pop. But that's one of the, hopefully in the future, DNA will be international as far as crime, to catch criminals, instead of just a national database.
Yeah, one of the things that he mentions in the steps that they would take, they would really dig deep into the background of the victim, behavioral questions. Like, for instance, he gave one of the scenarios, where do you get your pizza from when you order pizza? Where do you get your food delivered from? Anything like that, where there would have been an interaction with a delivery person, or locations that they frequented. I guess you'd want to know what gym they go to. If it was late at night, did you get off the subway? Which stop? And was there a connection that, maybe several of the victims had come from the same train station? So all of those things were very, very important. And he developed a lot of really good key points that they tried to follow each time there was a victim, to try and uncover the identity of this rapist. I know they were unsuccessful. It wasn't that they didn't try. I think it really sounds like that might be the best scenario so far, as with regard to the rapist, him being the employee of a consulate or a son or of a consulate member. I think he was described as a male. I know he was a male. I think he was a male, black or Hispanic was the general
Yeah.
description, correct?
Yeah, and the sketch was a little bit generic. It could
Yeah.
have looked like a lot of people, like a lot of sketches do. And it was a good point you were talking about. One of the things I was a robbery sergeant for a lot of years, and on every robbery report, it always asked the question, where was the victim prior to getting robbed?
Right.
You know, because that makes a lot of sense. Because if you were in a bar and someone observed you maybe a little tipsy, they may
Right.
follow you home and rob you. If you're at an ATM and you're withdrawing money, someone may follow you and rob you. If you're
Right.
walking home late at night by yourself, someone may be following you. So those are the questions that an investigator would ask. And it also applies to sex crimes. Where was the victim prior to the attack occurring? And that's a very important question that all investigators are trained to ask that question.
Yeah. It said they had a questionnaire that every victim was asked to fill out regarding, again, where they got their pizza, where they had their hair done, and things of that nature. What were their familiarities that they did that they could make a connection? What would be the common denominator between all the victims? And I don't think they ever came up one.
Joe Murray, someone was
There we
asking
go.
why does Joe hate John Walsh? He answered it. John Walsh is a cop-hating, self-aggrandizing, arrogant blank.
Mm.
I think it's a good time to do Joe's commercial.
Yes, I think it is. Joe Murray, attorney at law. Have you found yourself in a jam? Are you in need of legal counsel in the New York area? Do you need a victim's advocate? Well, Joe Murray is your man. He's not only an experienced trial attorney, he's also a retired 15-year member of the NYPD. He literally knows both sides of the fence. His website is jmurray-law.com. His telephone number is 646-838-1702, or you could email Joe at jmurray-law.com. And I think Joe has shown what he is worth in as an attorney. He comes up with some really, really good points when we're on the show, and he does some commenting.
I think Joe is probably a pit bull, and that's what you want when you need a really good attorney. Folks, I just want to apologize a little bit tonight. And John Baeza is a great guest, but unfortunately, the technology got in our way tonight. I was unaware that he didn't, and it was my fault partly, that he didn't have Google Chrome. Because if you don't have Google Chrome on your computer or your laptop, you cannot use StreamYard. It just does not work. And that's the technology we use to broadcast this. So he used his phone, and we do not have good success with people using their iPhones. This is the second person that
just asked Joe Cal from the other night.
Yeah, it just does not work very well. And whether it's the sound, and we were hearing what sounded like typing in the background. It was his phone, and then my son was fooling around my computer today trying to get my lighting better. And I think as a result, he must have moved my microphone because I was having a problem with my microphone. So I just apologize for some of the sound tonight. And I want to have John Baeza come back, but he didn't have enough room on his computer to download Google Chrome.
Oh, I was just going to say, all he's got to do is download.
Yeah, he didn't have enough room on his computer. So the next time I'll give him more time, and he can either delete something so he can upload that. But he would be a fascinating guest. He's a great investigator. He has a hell of a lot of experience. He's got that book out, and I feel a little stupid that this happened. But it can happen.
Bill, with the phones, when you use the phone, if you do have one of those little tripods, they have all different sizes. If the phone is locked in, it's tight. It could actually be pretty good. I've used the phone a couple of times, and listen, when it's in your hand and it's bouncing around, it's not going to work well. But if it's fixed, and here's one other, I guess you can call it a tip. If the phone is plugged into a charging port, it also helps the signal to go through better. I've learned that. Obviously, if you're near a Wi-Fi, it works wonders better too. But they do have good cameras, the latest phones, the smartphones. But that Google Chrome thing, yeah, that's important. And I was going to say, all you have to do is download it onto your computer. But like you said, he didn't have any room, so we'll have to have him back. And
Yeah, definitely. Melissa Amoroso, no, he did not. John did not have an iPad. I asked him that too. Joe Murray, he's still talking about John Walsh. Nancy Eileen, my dislike for him goes back to 1992 at the National Police Memorial in Washington, D.C. during Police Week, where he was the keynote speaker at Police Memorial, and he trashed the LAPD. So that's why Joe goes back to not liking John Walsh. But the show he has been very effective. They've helped track many, many fugitives, and they've caught many, many bad guys. Tomorrow, folks, Phil and I may be doing a double header, and I think we're gonna at 6 o'clock we're gonna revisit the Alec Baldwin case, because it's not that there's smoking gun stuff happening, but the assistant director, David Halls, is now sort of doing a tap dance on some of the things he said. OSHA, Office of Safety and Health Administration, the Organization of Safety and Health Administration, they want to interview him because they're in charge of investigations in regards to work safety. And he's refusing to meet with them. And a judge issued a subpoena. But I believe he could just show up, and he has to show up and take the fifth then.
Yeah.
I don't think he has to speak, but they're trying to track him down.
You would think that a criminal investigation would supersede OSHA's investigation. I'm sure they want to jump in there and because OSHA is a federal agency, and I'm sure they want to jump in there and get to the bottom of the nonsense that was going on. I mean, it was obviously an unsafe, film shoot. There was things going on, people walked off. We've talked about it before, but they do have investigative power to look into these type of things. But I would think that, an attorney, a client shows up with an attorney and says, listen, I'm not going to allow my client to answer any questions while there's still a pending criminal investigation. And they're just going to have to wait.
But Phil, he's already tap dancing also. His lawyer said he never said he handed him the gun. So now he's saying, and he admitted to that to the police, saying, I handed him the gun and said cold gun. And that's what Alec Baldwin's saying. So all of a sudden, these two buddies that were trying to be on the same page, and you got to be careful because one or both of them are lying.
Yeah.
They could be hit with perjury. All of a sudden, his lawyer's saying, oh, no, he didn't hand him the gun. We don't know how Alec got the gun. So, all of this stuff will come out.
If you remember from the 2020 interview with George Stephanopoulos, he said, oh, no, it's standard protocol because Stephanopoulos actually said, you're not supposed to get the gun from the AD or give the gun back to the AD. He goes, oh, no, that's not true. It happens all the time. Whether it happens all the time is one thing. I believe it probably does happen. However, that's not the protocol. The protocol is the gun is supposed to go from the armorer to the person that's going to be using it, the acting. Obviously, they're supposed to show it's safe and go through those protocols of cold gun, hot gun, whatever it is. But he made it sound like, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's not wrong. That's the procedure that is in place. The armorer is supposed to hand the actor the gun. However, we know for a fact, Baldwin said it, and I believe the AD, what's his name, Souza, that he said it. So I guess we're going to have to figure out which one of them is telling the truth.
So tomorrow at 6 o'clock, we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into that because there's some things that are changing now. And we're going to also have John Palucci on, the great crime scene sergeant from, he has his own company called Crime Scene Investigation. And he's going to come on. He enjoyed coming on the last time, and I think so did a lot of people that watched him. So
he's great.
He's a great guy. He's a great guy. And then also at 9 o'clock tomorrow night. So we're doing a double header. At 9 o'clock we have Red, White, and Bethune. So we have
Looking forward to that.
Kyle and Jen Bethune. Those are the folks that located Gabby Petito's van, which resulted in the police being able to, and the FBI being able to recover her remains. So a great family. If you don't know anything about them, they're a family that a husband and a wife, Jen and Kyle, and their 3 kids. And they lost a son 5 years ago in a vehicle accident. So they had 4 kids. They travel around the country in their mobile home, and they're bloggers, and that's the life they're living. I couldn't never spend that much time with my kids. I'd be jumping off the Grand Teton Mountains there. There's no way I could ever do that. I don't know how these people have the patience to do that, but they do that. So tomorrow night at 9, they're going to come on the show, and I believe Duty Ron is going to join us for a bit, and he's good. So it should be a pretty cool night. So I'm sorry again. I apologize for tonight. Sometimes some of these things are out of your control, and
It's called live TV, Bill. It happens.
yeah, I sound like Alec. I sound like Alec Baldwin making excuses. I don't want to make any excuses. Philly, you got any last thoughts?
Last thoughts. Listen, the subject matter that we were going to go over tonight, we did have those technical difficulties. Obviously, we apologize for that. But again, it's live TV. I don't think any victim should be taken for granted. All victims of horrible sex crime, sex abuse, rape, whatever it is, should be taken seriously. However, there are some times when there are people like Jesse Smollett. We know what he did. There's been some others. And you have to be able to not be afraid as an investigator to ask the hard questions. Again, sometimes you're going to ruffle some feathers. And, if I don't get a Christmas card, I've used that analogy many times. I don't mind. I want to get to the truth. That's what my obligation is as an investigator. We're all in the Christmas spirit. All the brothers and sisters in blue, please stay safe out there. Our military, please stay safe. I hope everybody gets home to their families. I hope everybody has a great Christmas season. We're only about 10 days out from Christmas. Really looking forward to tomorrow night's show, Billy. Those people, they just hold a special place in my heart. We were so connected to that Gabby Petito case. I get chills just talking about it. And again, that 6 o'clock show, looking forward to doing that, digging down on some of the latest occurrences regarding the Alec Baldwin incident.
Okay, folks. Again, everyone stay safe out there, and thank you so much for listening tonight. And we'll make you up for tomorrow night at 6, and again at 9, a doubleheader of the Phil and Bill show. So everyone be safe and have a great night.
Stay safe, everybody.
One episode just ain't enough.